When I graduated from college, I was 22, and as I like to say, I ran away from the UK to move to Italy to build a life that I loved. I had no job lined up, no place to live, but I knew I was just going to make it happen. Now, when I first moved to Italy, I had a friend's place that I could stay at, and he said I could stay for as long as I wanted, within reason. So after about 7 days, I was growing really impatient and wanted my own space. So 7 days after moving to Italy, I went to go and look at a flat in the historical centre, and I decided that this was the one. It was within my budget. I had my own room on a second floor separated from the rest of the house, but my budget meant that I had to live with flatmates. The other flatmates had been there for 10 plus years, and I decided, you know what, this is the place for me. Upon reflection, probably should have looked at it a little harder before saying yes. Pretty soon after moving into that flat, I understood there were a bit of problems around the place. The whole flat was a little bit in shambles, but it had character. It was in the middle of the historical quarter of the city. I had this romantic idea in my head that I had just moved out from college and I was a struggling artist or entrepreneur that was just going to power through and make it work. And these were the really gritty days that were going to give me character. The reality of that wasn't always as pretty, but I will say that I did have this lovely room, this lovely big room to myself. It was shabbier than chic, but I guess I was telling myself it was shabby chic. There were so many problems with the flat. The hobs would just stop working. The drawers didn't even work when I moved in. My shower would have the water supply cut off if anyone started using any type of water anywhere else in the house. My toilet didn't have a toilet seat, and probably a lot of other things that I just can't remember at the moment. But like I said, this was my romantic vision of what it was going to be like living in Italy. And honestly, it's just the reality sometimes. You have to put in a bit of struggle to get to the nicer apartments and be a little more cushy and comfy later on. Fairly soon after I moved into the flat, I started pushing, asking where the contract was for me to be living there. And I was told that the landlord was a bit unreliable, but the contract should arrive soon. And my flatmates reassured me they needed the contract too, so don't worry, it was going to come. Now, it was in my interest to get this contract as soon as possible because for things like opening a bank account, getting my residency, getting healthcare, it was really important that I had a house contract. I moved into my place on September the 1st. It got to about November, December time, and I realised this contract wasn't going to come anytime soon unless I started pushing. So I started making daily calls to our landlord who, important message, our property was owned by the church. Our landlord was in employment of the church. He wasn't a priest, but he was someone who was working in that establishment. So I start making regular calls to my good friend, Signor, not going to say his name. And when he did pick up, he was just kind of annoyed, to be honest. There were lots of problems. He said, yes, I'm waiting on someone else. At one point he was in an accident. I don't know if that accident was legitimate or not, but he said he was very injured. And once he even picked up the phone and just asked me to have un po' di pazienza. I even packed up my bags and started to look for new apartments because I was so desperate for this contract. But lo and behold, at the beginning of February, we got our contract, I signed it, and I was actually legally living in the flat. Now, the contract was from 1 year and it started from September. Yes, they're allowed to start contracts from September even if they don't register them until February. So I had a place to live until August. So I actually started paying my rent because I didn't even know where to pay rent to until I had this contract, which made another thing very clear to me. They were not in desperate need of this money. They are the church. They don't have to do things like pay taxes. So this property was clearly just something they had in their portfolio that wasn't of huge importance to them. Another quick tip, you should probably be able to tell that from the fact the flat is falling apart when you go to look at it. But from February to August, I lived in that flat fairly event-free. So once the year rolled around and it got to September of the next year, I knew that it was time for them to renew the contract, and I was even thinking in advance, you know what, this year I've got my residency, I've got my healthcare, I'm not going to be chasing him for the contract. If he wants to take his time, he can take his time, but this year it's not going to be my responsibility to chase him like it was last year. And once September came, life got busy. I was doing freelance work. I was even starting to think about leaving my main freelancing gig that I've been doing for a few months to try and level up and pursue more ambitious things. And with that, I even started to think about whether Italy was going to be the right place for me. So by the time November rolled around, I had quit that main freelance contract, I was hustling for new contracts, and I had made the decision to leave Italy at the end of December. And it was around that time that this happened. I just got an email from our landlord saying that he needs us to leave. No, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I think I'm going to couch surf for a bit then. I don't even know when I have to be out by. Fuck. I guess he was tipped off by the fact that I sent him an email in October saying that one of the hobs wasn't working and please could he sort it out. But a month later, mid to late November, he sent just me and a couple of girls who used to live in the flat a couple of years ago but didn't anymore, an email saying that we shouldn't be in the flat, and he didn't even know who was living in the flat anymore. And as he had told us in June, he wasn't going to rent out the flat this year and we needed to leave. This email came as a huge surprise to all of us. I told my flatmate after having that freak out that you just saw, and she said that she'd seen him in June and he'd mentioned to her that he was considering not renting out the flat the year after, but he hadn't said anything to any of the others, and he certainly hadn't given us any official warning in writing. Now, we spoke to some lawyers and things after this, and it's a grey area. The truth is that he was in the wrong, but of course without a contract we shouldn't have been living in the flat. But then again, we shouldn't have been living in the flat without a contract the year before, and this is how things have been working between the girls living there and the landlord for the last 10 years. We sent an email back to him explaining this, and we told him that, like every year as it had always been, we were waiting for him to contact us with the contract, which had always been signed late. We never heard back from that email. He never replied to us. But I already knew that I was going to be leaving at the end of December, and my plan was to couch hop if I needed to. But really, I was just living in this kind of limbo, not knowing if he was going to reply or not, and not knowing if he could turn up at our door and kick us out, or even worse, come when I wasn't there and take my things. I just didn't know, and I just didn't trust him at this point, and I didn't really know what to do. This definitely isn't a pity party. I have learnt my lesson for sure. But we did manage to speak to the priest who worked for the church that owned the building, and he said that he didn't know about the situation but not to worry, and that they would give us some time to find new accommodation. So I did carry on living there for another month and a half before I left the country, actually. But I definitely learned a lesson from that experience, and that's why I'm telling you today. Things that I learnt from this experience. I definitely know a lot more now about moving to a new country, about finding accommodation, and about little signs that you can look out for, both in people and in the place that you're looking at, that can tell you a whole lot more than just the fact the drawers aren't fixed. Maybe it means that the landlord is neglecting the property. I was hesitant on whether or not to film this video because I'm not trying to be critical of anyone, I'm just being very honest about what my experience was, the mistakes that I made, and I of course don't think that the other parties involved necessarily handled it in the right way. Please don't try this at home. That's a really stupid thing to do, because the reality is that you're left in a vulnerable situation. If there's a fire, if something is robbed, you have no way of proving where you live. It's illegal. From speaking to legal advisors afterwards, we do think that courts would have ruled in our favour had this had to go to court, but of course we don't know that for sure. The truth is, it's just a very unstable and scary way to live. I would not recommend it. Another lesson I learnt: if something looks too good to be true, then it probably is. I don't regret living in that room because I had the most beautiful view from my window. If you go back and watch my videos when I was living in Italy, all of them were filmed in that room, and I was really sad to leave it. It will always have a special place in my heart. I lived a lot of important moments there. But if the house doesn't look well taken care of, then there's a very good chance that the landlord's not going to take good care of you. And I realise that's just the reality of it sometimes when you've just graduated, or when you move out for the first time, or if you're in a precarious situation. You can avoid it if you have the money to avoid it. Not even if you have the money, if you have the time or if you have the money to avoid a situation like that, 100% take advantage of it and don't rush into something that you're going to regret later. And that's my final point. Take your time when you're looking for an apartment. I tried to look for an apartment in advance. I came to Italy early. That's a whole other story. It didn't go well. I had a friend help me look for apartments in person when I was away. don't sign on to something without looking at it or getting a trusted friend to look at it. Don't send money to people without seeing that it's a real place, because you could get scammed. Pay the extra money or take the extra time to get an Airbnb for a couple of weeks, even a month if you need to, and take your time and find a decent place. I'm sharing this story mainly because I told you about it on my Instagram and you wanted to hear my experience. But also I hope that this can help to avoid some of you from making the same mistakes that I did. Don't worry, there are plenty of other mistakes for you to make when you're moving abroad for the first time, or even for the 5th time like me. So just try to avoid that one. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you're new to the channel, my name's Emily. I make videos about life abroad and running a business abroad. So if you want to stick around, then do subscribe, and thanks very much for joining. I'll see you in my next video. If I do say so myself, the next video should be a really bloody good. If everything goes to the plan, then in 2 weeks' time I'm going to be sharing the highlights from my recent trip to Albania. It was an incredible trip. I got some great footage, and I can't wait to tell you more about a country that I don't think has got as much attention yet. And I'll be telling you my feelings on that too. Have a good day, guys, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.